The theme for the afternoon talk is the ego and wisdom. In the beginning of the talk with you, I'd like to offer some general explanation with regard to the concept and the understanding of what is referred to, and then the relationship of wisdom and significant relationship of it to it, of course. So we look at our life, and in a very general way, we find ourselves in this movement through the field of existence. We call it life, regularity of the transitions, we might say, from birth through unto death. And in the perceptions that we share together, there's a recognition and appreciation of the immense field of existence with its long history dating back millions, if not billions of years. And here we are as human beings, currently alive, currently conscious, in this field of time, moving through the journey through life. It is important and precious and valuable to have a larger sense of things, because that is a real contribution to getting our modest, small life into a proper perspective. When using the language of ego, the Sanskrit word captures it rather well. It is ahamkara. And what it means is aham is I, and kara, close to karma. Kara is activity, I making activity. So the presence, the emergence, the manifestation of ego, of I, component my, reveals and confirms itself through the frequency of use of the language of I. And the regularity of that gives a status, a reality, a substance to the notion of I, through the excesses of thinking in terms of I. When we engage in that, it's called ego. And the frequency of use of the I gives it a solidity, and in that solidity which is given to it, it also generates the gap between other and, quote unquote, oneself. So excessive I here will be the expense there, and there will be a gap in that relationship. Sometimes I read, and here I don't have this particular view, but I read in here, there of this notion of a separate self-existence there. For some people, that is possibly a useful form of language, but frankly I don't think it goes anywhere deep enough into seeing into the nature of things. But I'll address that in a moment or two. With the manifestation of the I and the self, it's very easy in its movement into consciousness that it, so to speak, lands on. And it is a challenge for awareness and clarity to recognize what it lands on. And there are some very common areas. One of them, of course, as we've touched upon here, is the body. So there's the movement of the I. When the I emerges, arises, and it's carrying with it kind of baggage. The baggage could be notions of self-importance, the notions of fear, holding and grasping. So the eye arises, it lands on something, okay, called the body. In this particular case, it's an actor, it's an ego there when in the relationship to, in this case, the body. We can either, as we do with the states of mind and much else, we can either be trying to build ourselves up to impress ourselves or others, or we put ourselves down. And both those extremes, building ourselves up and putting ourselves down, both equally is egotistical. And it happens in relation to the body, feelings, states of mind, identity, that when things are not as I would want them to be, there can be a reaction to that, and in the reaction, that is the self and the I, it reacts, and sometimes the reaction is in the negative, putting oneself down. I'm not good enough, it never works out for me, I've made a mess of my life, I have so little self-worth, self-blame, guilt, and much more. So the I has arisen, it's brought up with it various old habits and patterns and states of mind, and then it lands on, so it comes with it, and then we get a thought and a view. This is who I am. I'm not good enough, I'm always making mistakes, never do anything right, my life keeps falling apart, and so forth. And very easy, when there is a sense of lack inside the being, the absence of that lack, not being good enough, whatever, the compensation for that is to try to build up the self. And the different strategies which are used to build up our self. And that building up of the self, that may show itself as self-importance, it may show itself in the wish for success, in being somebody, to impress others, to gain recognition and acknowledgement. And this all becomes a strategy to move away from putting oneself down to building oneself up. It's an ego trip, both directions. And the vulnerability of that, of course, is that the construct, I have built myself up, I am a successful person, I have achieved this, I was like this, but now I have achieved that. All of this building up is very fragile, it's very, very vulnerable, and it only takes one human being to withdraw, and has a role, and whatever that role may be, and the other withdraws, and there will be a crash, a decline in the experience, in the formation of the self, and one will be back where one started. And there is a lot going on between feeling a lack of self-worth to trying to build up one's self-worth, building it up and then finding it's very hard to keep, it's very, very hard to sustain, and it's vulnerable. And when human beings have, at the psychological level for the moment, haven't understood this swing of the ego, putting ourselves down and building ourselves up. If there is a low sense of self-worth, one will be magnetically attracted and pulled towards those who appear to be really self-important. And we live in a time, and it's a tragic period as where people have a low sense of their self-worth, easily find themselves attracted to those who seem very powerful, who seem very confident, who seem to be in charge and in control of things, and they get our vote. That's part of the tragedy of it. We lose the sense of what the middle ground is because we're in this polarity of building ourselves up, putting ourselves down, building ourselves up, and it acts as a kind of blind spot. In the exploration and of the mindfulness, as I say, sometimes with the self, it really goes to the object. And that object could be a person or a place or identity in some way or other. And it's an extraordinary thing to really take real notice in our life of what our attention lands upon, and to make some time while one is here to ask ourselves, currently in my life, what is really important to me? What are the primary activities of my daily life? To look at those primary activities, quite often manifesting through the role. Roles, plural, yeah, little roles. The role itself is a social agreement. It's a construct, useful and valid, when there's ethics and kindness in it, of course. A role and a construct which is by agreement with the other. We have our various roles in life, and it requires the affirmation, the confirmation of the other to give support to the role. And we thereby also give, in our construct, give support to the other, the role of the other in relationship to us. The construct, called the role, called the identity. Sometimes people say to us, "Who are you?" You see, or what do you do? Those of us who have to travel rather a lot, sometimes if I have a conversation with a passenger on an aeroplane, it's probably about once every 2 years. I like the quiet there, so responses tend to be warm and short. So sometimes we say, "Oh, where are you from?" Then the next question is, what do you do? So then I'll say, I'm teaching. Right? They say, "Oh, are you teaching in a primary school? Are you teaching in college?" And then I'll say, I'm a Dharma teacher. And they say, "Oh, you're a drama teacher." And then after that, I'm looking for my eye shades. Right. So sometimes in the relationship to the other, there's the vulnerability with the role. You and I, we have our roles and our functions in life. That the old, that means the unresolved, easily enters into the role. And it influences the role. And when it's problematic, we would see that in the function of the role, it is under a pressure. And what brings the problematic, which is the self, the ego, entering into it, is nearly always the one, should we call it emotional or psychological or mental component, which is in a problematic situation, will be desire. It will be present. And when there is desire, which is different from clarity and intention and action, when there is desire, there is pressure. And that pressure can go to the object, which is called her or him or them, or it can go backwards towards ourselves. So a human being wishing to be clear and skillful will practice and learn to catch the movement of desire. And I'm using it in its Dharma, Buddhist, you might say, sense. And what that means in its Dharma Buddhist language here is a movement of wanting in which, in its expression there, it is creating some kind of difficulty for oneself or for the other, in some way or other. And that movement has got some distortion in it, for sure. There is an exaggeration, this is what desire is, it exaggerates the situation, it inflames it there, and that stress of that puts the pressure on the other or the pressure on ourselves. And it is to know the difference between that which is ego, which is the the dependency on the self, on getting what I want, that is the ego, and to know the difference between that and a wise, that's the wisdom element, skillful response to a situation. And it is the task of our species to be very clear about movement, in this case towards, which has desire in it, the way that I just expressed, and the movement towards, which has clarity, which is the same as love. To really get to know the difference. As for example, some of you are parents here, some of you have responsibilities, it's a kind of parental role, being taken care of. Therefore, it requires from us the maximization of the wisdom, which confirms itself as the love, and the love goes towards many different expressions and manifestations of it. But adults and children are not always cooperating with great enthusiasm and submission and conviction to all this love we're pouring on them. So then they're not doing as they are told. They're not doing as the thought of what we think they should be doing. And in that dynamic, the other is perceived in a particular way. There is, humanly enough, some pressure and tension which is here. And with that pressure and tension becomes the desire to control the situation. And the effort to control, which is the ego, because in those moments one basically has become a little right-wing fascist dictator. And to be quite clear about it, there are fascists outside of Canberra, you know, and that's right. Don't forgive me on that. But it is a desire to control and have things as the self wants them to be. And of course that easily can invite even more rebellion. It's almost bound to. A small incident with regard to that. I remember years ago, because my daughter was 4 or 5 years of age, she's now 38. So we went to California with her mum. It was a few minutes walk away to give some retreats, and we stayed in a large house of a community. Two of the people in the community, they were family guidance counsellors. The difficulty was neither of them, they were a married couple, neither of them were parents. So we arrived, we were in this large house, Dharma friends, two family guidance and counselors, and our beloved daughter, as children was playing up. She was tired, she was irritable, she didn't want to go out, didn't want to be in, etc. Nothing was pleasing for the young girl. And then, from the two family marriage guidance counsellors, we got a lecture on parenting, etc. And as I listened to it, kind, thoughtful guidance, etc., which my daughter, of course, 5 years of age, took absolutely no notice of, which is her right. And my comment afterwards was how important, not always, but how important and valuable raw experience actually is there. This is the end of the story. A few years later, because it's going every year, they had a son, now in his 30s, only about 30, whatever. The son, just like my daughter, was playing up, etc. And they got so frustrated with him, they grabbed hold of the boy, picked him up, put him in his room, shut the door, and said to him, "You can only come out when you stop yelling and shouting." I was so tempted to give a lecture, but I resisted, etc. With kids, to use it as a small example, the wanting comes in, the wish to control, one's upset, one's angry, one is irritated, and all of that goes on. When we kind of lose the plot, when there is an overreactivity to the circumstance of the presence of the other, it's vital, not only with the kids, but also with others, to find the skillful ways of means in which we take responsibility for our reactivity. We genuinely take responsibility for our reactivity, because in that reactivity, in this case, there's blame, and in blame, there is desire. In the desire, in this case, there's fault-finding and anger and losing our cool. And children and adults is a really important dynamic to look at. But the same desire also, where the ego comes in and the self comes in, is in the material world as well, in the getting what I want. And that inner movement carries in with us a picture, an image, an idea, whatever that item may be, from a thing to money or whatever it may be. It gains a significance beyond what it is. It's a tendency to project into something what actually isn't there. It's given some significance outside of its merit, as some value. And when we're in that mode, there is nothing which will easily fit in with the image there. To give a small example of one of my beloved partner years ago, some of you may have been unlucky enough to have found yourself in Oxford Street in London. It's a nightmare. It's the hell realm of consumerism, in my view. And my good friend, unfortunately, had spotted on somebody else's feet the pair of shoes that she wanted. And that image was imprinted. Do you know how many shoe shops there are in Oxford Street? I couldn't even see the difference. And she said, no, there were a kind of sandal, straps too wide, or it's too narrow, or it's, I wanted my toes to be seen, or not, whatever it was. If you walk from Tottenham Court Road, it's like crossing the Gobi Desert or the Simpson Desert. Right down to the other end we went. In and out of shoe shops. I just stood in the doorway and waited there. And then she said, no, I can't quite find what I'm looking for. And then we crossed the street, and then we walked all the way back, and we got right back to Tottenham Court Road tube station, having looked in every single tube shop she still hadn't found. And she said, what's your response? And I said, I've just worn out a pair of shoes, different shoes. You know, so sometimes, bless you, we have an image and a picture, and we can't find it. A good friend of mine, beautiful heart and warm and caring and has depth. And she said to me, Christopher, there is a man inside of you, and I'm looking for this man there. And I know exactly the man that I really want to meet and really want to connect. And I know exactly it. And my comment was, this man who you would like to be with, who is inside of you, I promise you, he is not there. This man does not exist, except in the image and in the picture. And that situation, where one has the idea, carries it around, as the false world there, and the picture and the image is disconnected from events. The build-up of that picture is called ego. The identification with it is called ego. It's called self. It's called what I want. Whether it's in the wanting of things, whether it's in the wanting of the status, or whether it's in the wanting to control the other. So, much of the time, and in plenty of circumstances there, we do handle things, can handle things well and gracefully. But part of the knowing of ourselves is where and in what ways do I experience, most noticeably, the manifestation of desire. That means a problematic wanting, in which there is some dependency on the outcome, there is some projection or distortion in the desiring, the craving, the wanting itself, and to really see if I can really notice where that manifests. And Dharma teachings, when it's referred to, oh, Dharma is speaking about the end of desire, it is. Not that it is. But it's the movement which is problematic. And to get to know the difference, and in the Pali the difference is much easier, between wanting, craving, desiring, must have, or whatever, and to the difference between that and calm, clear action, which is the wish for. Understand? There is a wish for, and we're not interested in trying to get rid of the wish for. We respect it. We appreciate that it's part of human life to have the wish for. And that wish for may well be followed through with an action, but we can get to know the difference between the wish for and the desiring, craving, neediness, must have. So one is not infected with ego, the wish for. That wish for may be stated very clearly, very unambiguously, with real conviction and passion, that also can be in the world of the wish for, the shy. Something we need to speak up firmly and clearly have the wish. But to recognize when it's got something else involved in it, and to know there's wisdom in the wish for, and there's something problematic for ourselves and others in that complicated, reactive kind of view. And so our reactions, then, it is a reaction. It's an old reacting in the present. And Dharma teachings are a liberation for the action, not just being in the spell of the reaction. And then in the exploration of these areas, small events, sometimes with the story and sometimes also the humour that goes with these situations, that the small story, like the shoe story, small incident in the Dharma community in California, or whatever it might be, helps. It's one of the lovely things about the story. It just helps to bring some important Dharma teachings, we might say, into down-to-earth recognition of how that might be in our daily life. So there's the event, the description, the analysis, and then with it comes the story. And stories are rather precious, particularly in our communications there, if with the story that takes place, because there's heart and feeling with the story, there's a memory, it can communicate a kind of deep truth, this important thing, which is bigger than the story. It's not about a pair of shoes. It's not about a little girl and a little boy playing up. Of course, that's a factor. But it gives us inwardly a reminder of sometimes similar events in our daily life with others, where we get to recognize where the reactivity is and where the skill is, where the wisdom is and where it isn't. And we need those kind of stories. And sometimes in the movement of these sharings and stories that take place, they help in an odd sort of way to bring light upon a much bigger situation. And sometimes people and young people I have in my mind here, they can be quite attuned to us as adults and our relationship to events. To give an example, once again, of what I mean. I have a grandson. So the grandchildren are the four of them, single mum, Anglo-Caribbean, and the oldest, he's 18, he's in college. And he's really a great guy, and plenty of teenagers, those who have connection with the teenagers, so he goes off to college, and then he rings Lashona, his mum, up, and he says to her, "Oh, Mum, I forgot my sandwiches. Can you bring them over to the college?" And she said, "Okay," and then she went, "But you forgot them the other day, and before that as well. No, I'm fed up with running after you and bringing the sandwiches over to the college." You go to the corner shop and go and buy some. So that's what happened. So then the young guy, 18 years of age, comes home, and his mum says to him, humanly enough, I'm fed up with doing the washing up after you every night. It's your turn. You should do the washing up. And then he said to her, laughing, with some humour, it made me laugh as well. He said to her, this is to his mum, Caribbean kid, African roots as well. He says to his mum, that's the trouble with you white people. You still want us to be your us blacks to be your slaves. I mean, it's sharp. He was laughing when he said it. And sometimes in the small little incident with it kind of just gives a reminder for all of us in the relationships of one to the other, and how even with colour as an example, not only, of course, we'll appreciate this, the fiction of, and the Buddha protested about this, about racism and the use of colour in the caste system, because those who were of a quote-unquote darker skin, often because they were the labourers and the farm workers out in the sun generation after generation, and those who were of the lighter skin were the wealthy, the Brahmins and the privileged there who were shielded from the sun, etc. And even in the languages that we use in terms of colour, even that's false. I mean, we're not white even. If anything, we're a bit pinky, you know, we hardly call ourselves white. But one only has to look at the t-shirts the young man's got on here. Exactly, and the one here, hardly white, etc. And then we call people from the black community black, but they're not black. And then the poor Asians and Chinese people, yellow, I mean, come on, etc. The whole language and description is also completely off, let alone the divisions that go along with it. So the words doesn't reflect anything like the reality. The views and the opinions and the desires certainly don't. And all of that prevents us seeing much deeper than the view and the appearance. Desire is in every act of racism, homophobia, sexism, the separation of one community from another. It's an act of the will, the act of division, the act of apartheid, the act of fragmentation between the nation states. And the only thing that can make that happen is a desire for that to be viewed in that way. And therefore, with the Dharma, it's genuine commitment to challenging in the species of humanity the force of desire and the consequences of it, and which we witness in countless ways. And that's part of the work of engagement with life, and that responsibility to question desire, whether it's towards us or whether it's from within and going externally as well. In our meditations and in our practices, to look at a way of life which is rich, nourishing and fulfilling, which has energy to it, which is so precious and important. One thing I would really recommend here is to look at the language of I and the word which follows it, and quite often the word which follows it is must. M-U-S-T. I must. So the self arises, it's got this word must with it, and the must puts a pressure upon us, and in the pressure there it takes a lot of energy, it takes the willpower, but the must and the willpower, if it happens, cannot sustain itself. So we might say to ourselves, and we might say to others, I really must do this, whatever it might be. And one might start what I must do, but it won't sustain itself. And then we wonder, wow, I started this, I knew I must do this, but I just faded away. And with the fading away, there is the sense of loss of that willpower, loss of that energy to do. And with the loss of the energy to do, then arises the view, I never seem to get anything done. There is a sense of lack. So I start off, I must, and I start. Then there is a sense of lack, because it's not fulfilled or it's not started. And then in that gap, there is some loss of self-worth. There could be feelings of failure and hard views about oneself. Can we change, not a major change, really be very mindful and careful of the language of I must, because it's a recipe for pressure, and even if we do follow through, I must do this, when it's completed, then a new I must has to arise, and at some point there's going to be disappointment. There has to be. Feelings of failure. There has to be. So it needs to be a shift from I must, which is the will, which is desire, which is wanting. And could it be that interest and the nourishment and the development of interest contributes beautifully to the act of the motivation, to really express interest, to really look at something with a real interest. And that quality of the interest then can be inspirational for us to create, to help make things happen, because the interest is there, and that interest is love. That's the confirmation of love. When there's ethics, care, and interest in the movement of life, by any other word, we would call this love. So our shift is the exploration, just to summarize, of desire, of ego, building ourselves up, putting ourselves down, and there's no real happiness nor peace in that. We are here to find a middle way between these two, really recognize and acknowledge the capacity to respond, the act of the wish to engage, to follow through with. And if our life, if we use this dreadful four-lettered word called busy, if that's in the framework of our thinking and we're telling other people, my small request is, please regard, if you have a description of yourself as being busy, as a very severe pathological mental illness. So there is no sense in it of any, oh, I'm so busy, I'm sorry, I can't see you until about January the 25th. Whatever it might be. So that in the relation to this busy word that we have, it's a word which disconnects us, of all the activities, disconnect us from deep things which matter. Because we haven't got time for deep things which matter. Because we've got this pathological illness called being busy, which is a way for the ego to feed its sense of self-importance. It's a little injection of the ego of being busy. But we have to go much deeper than that formation. And we can realize and appreciate, in a way, that when we talk about I and me and my, with something problematic about it, it's a friction. You and I are a mere friction on this earth. And the little friction goes on, and up pops the I and the me and the my. And if there's an absence of friction there, then it's a shorthand language. So I might say, I am sitting here. So the I is a shorthand because it's a bit of a mouthful to say, oh, this whole mind, body, consciousness, feeling, emotion that is sitting here, so God, I am sitting here. A short description like that. It's a short description to say, oh, my recorder or my clothes. Just a small gesture of connection with. And if we can just remember to have the freedom to use the language of I and my, remembering it is just a description. That's all it is. And with that description, be calm and clear and comfortable with it. And there are many things which in our relationship we are very calm and clear and comfortable about. And many things which we have, also things there, which end up in the charity shop anyway. So most of the things that come our way, they just come in and they're around for a while, including our homes or whatever it might be. It might come sooner or later. Everything's in a kind of transition. And if we're not clinging and holding, which is what the ego tends to do, we can be moved this movement of life. Not easy, but we can be much more easily with it. And we just need enough mindfulness when it's wanting, desire, craving. Enough mindfulness when it's got the I must in it. Enough interest to really be present and available. The clarity to know movement of life and recognize when the ego is not in the way. And there are plenty of times, every day, when the ego is not in the way, it's not always present. It depends on holding, possessiveness, clinging, fearing, stress, desiring, etc. And therefore the absence of that, knowing that, the absence of, is wisdom. Be clear about the difference. One brings much happiness and joy with the wisdom that just comes along with it, and the other is a pain in the butt. All right, thank you. Let's have a quiet minute, shall we? may all beings explore the times of the manifestation of ego. May all beings recognize and acknowledge the clarity without the ego. May all beings live with love and wisdom. Thank you for lending an ear. And the time now is 4:45. Time for standing, walking, further sitting, some one-to-ones, and then the food at 5:30. Enjoy.